Welcome to the Maritime Cybersecurity Risks and Best Practices webinar. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Ross Nodurft. I will be guiding you through the different sessions that we have. First of all, I'd like to thank our partners at Tread Micro for helping bring this panel together, or this session together. We look forward to what we're going to talk about today. So just to give you guys a general run of show, we'll be hearing from General Services Administration, the U.S. government, former Israeli and U.S. cybersecurity officials, state and local cybersecurity practitioners, and port cybersecurity practitioners. The webinar is going to lay out some specific cybersecurity and technical challenges and risks that we are facing with our maritime system, and then discuss some of the best practices to secure our maritime and ports. The discussion will feature keynotes, and we're very excited to have some of those folks with us right now. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our former U.S. and Israeli cybersecurity officials. They know a lot about the space and are going to share with us their perspectives globally on port and maritime security. With that, over to you, Caitlin.
Thanks, Ross, and good morning, everyone. I am Caitlin Clark. I'm a Senior Director of Cybersecurity Services here at Venable. But prior to joining, I served as the Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Cyber and Emerging Technology on the National Security Council from 2023 to 2024. And I'm joined by one of my colleagues from Israel, Yigal Yuna. You want to introduce yourself, Yigal?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Yigal Una, 36 years in what is now called cybersecurity. I started way before it had this name. We had the data warfare and other names. But recently, 3 years ago, I finished a 4-year term as the Director General of the Israeli National Cyber Directorate, which is a long name for basically the CISO of the State of Israel. For 4 years, I'm a survivor, as you see. I had an afro haircut before that now, but yes, I survived. Here to tell.
I feel your pain. So in my role on the National Security Council, I led defensive cybersecurity. And the cyber response group for the U.S., which was the federal government's organization for responding to significant cyber incidents in the U.S. And I know we're here to talk about ports, and over the 2 years that I was in my seat, we saw the port of Nagoya in Japan being hit by a ransomware attack. We saw just last summer in 2024, the port of Seattle being hit by a ransomware attack. I think just this week they made some notices that 90,000 individuals were impacted by that event last year. And we've also heard about PRC-aligned cyber actors that we call Volt Typhoon, who have been pre-positioning on transportation networks. So all of that is the threat environment we're in right now. But Yigal, given your experience in Israel, what are some of the critical port and maritime risks that you've identified and experienced?
Well, without disclosing too much, ideas for the bad guys, I'm sure nobody's here, but you can never tell. Cyber. Well, we discovered. Let me start by describing the commercial aviation. In 2017, the first Dreamliner, Boeing 787, landed in Israel to the El Al, the Israeli airline fleet, and we went over to see the great miracle of the new. Great innovation by Boeing, the Dreamliner. Now it should be and really is a lot of digitalization and a lot of connectivity and a great stuff. But remember, and that goes also for maritime. The Boeing was designed. They ended the design in 2005. The term cyber began to be used in around 2008. 2009. So it was when it first flight already like 5, 6, 10 years obsolete or be behind it. I mention that because when we take a look at the maritime, we unfortunately see more or less the same. A lot of connectivity, a lot of digitalization, but attack surfaces growing without the compliance or without the right solutions or the right remedies for growing threats. And when we talk about threats, remember, it's not just about networks. It's not just about computers. It's even mostly with the GPS, with the geolocation, with all the kind of things that usually cyber and CISOs don't take care of. GPS is not just positioning. It's about timing. It's about coordination, synchronization, everything. And you can derail, if you can say that about ships, and take ships and, by the way, cripple ports. One example, just to express it, is the port of Haifa, one of the, back then, two major ports. Now we have four major ports. Unfortunately, one of them is a little off. It's owned by China. But back then, 50% of our ports in Haifa, I got a phone call when I was the CISO of Israel. I got a phone call from the port. They said, we cannot upload or download containers at all. I said, okay, why is that? Is it cyber attack? I said, no. But we have a GPS jamming and spoofing that all our cranes dependent on GPS on locating and uploading, downloading the containers. Once the GPS is off, we're crippled. Now, it's not a joke. We saw a line of trucks waiting outside of the port of Haifa, and the drivers are a little nervous with the, with the horns and everything, up to 2 or 3 miles from the port. So I asked them, why do you call me? I'm the cyber guy. They said, okay, we don't have any other address to call. That's an example of how we need to take a look at this problem. It's a multi-technology, multi-surface, attack surface, multi-everything that all is connected. And if one part of it is neglected or not taken care properly, then the whole system doesn't work, or even worse.
Exactly. We're starting to move into the moment of smart ports with even more smart technology, cranes, scanners, the automation, which brings some efficiency within ports, also expands that risk profile and that risk scale for everyone. You've been working for the last few years with ports and maritime officials around the world. What have you been seeing as common risks, and what are some of the best practices you've seen from your work in Asia and otherwise?
Yes. Well, I just finished also 2 years now as a private citizen, but assisting and consulting to the Singapore Maritime and Port Authority. And the good news is that the maritime works like in aviation. It's getting more and more a common language, a common denominators, common technologies even. It's not a duopoly like in the aviation, Airbus and Boeing sharing or splitting the world. It's more divided, but it's converging into several technologies that will dominate 80-90% of the world. That's, on one hand, it's a great news, not just for the vendors, of course, but for connectivity, for easy handling. Yes, it makes the industry much easier to work and to connect and to deliver. But it comes with a big risk. And that's something that we all need to pay attention. Because as the technologies are converging and getting to the few focal points, then the attraction for the bad guys, for the threat actors, and I'm not talking only about state-sponsored, even cybercrime groups and others, hey, we'll need less to investigate or to develop vulnerabilities and exploit them and others, because it's converging. That gets or puts a lot of responsibility over the vendors. But we know how it works. It needs to come from the governments, from all like-minded players, which is many in the maritime. It's the shipping companies, it's the shipyards. We have few major shipyards around the world, in Korea, in UAE, and others, that in Italy, Croatia, that's responsible for, and of course US, responsible for 80-90%. If we get, and I must say only, if we get the major vendors in the different parts of maritime aligning and putting the right effort, energy, budgets over this issue, which I still feel, again, from my experience, not just in Israel, mostly out of Israel. Israel is more aware, but the solutions will start with the vendors, with the governments and regulators asking the vendors to comply with that and to begin to build by design much more secure because the attack surfaces are enormous in this business, and we're just on the beginning, on the verge of understanding how big is it.
As you said, we're just at the beginning to understand the technologies in the ports and where there might be some of these convergence. You talked about airlines, and I think my experience is that there are some sectors where there's a lot of information sharing between the private sector entities because they use similar vendors or they have similar risk profiles. Are you seeing that in the maritime space, or is this an area where we need, as a community, to lean in more on information sharing?
Well, commercial aviation is undoubtedly the safest way to travel in the world, statistically, and by far from any other mean of transportation. The main reason for that is the NTBS and the other NTSB, all the means of safety regulations, not just in the US but globally. That if something bad happens in Singapore, almost an accident or a glitch or something like that, by 12 hours, the entire fleet of this airplane, if it's an airplane, or airports, if it's airport, will have a full report with the lessons need to be learned. It's amazing and it's safe. In maritime, we're not even close to the beginning of that, and we need to build communities. Today, we have more and more communities regarding, seaports, mainly regional, or between shippings. But information sharing regarding cybersecurity, it's still a new, fresh thing. For example, in Israel, we tried to build the Mediterranean Maritime Cyber Alliance, and we had pretty much around the Mediterranean. We had Greece and Cyprus and even Croatia and even Switzerland with its great shores and beaches. No, but seriously, there are very strong players in shipping, the MSC, and they also took part with it because it really gets into everybody. Everybody's having some supply chain issues with the maritime. Unfortunately, this initiative is not strong enough. It's still only 3 or 4 countries, including Israel, but it should be much bigger. And why just Mediterranean? Yes, we have a regional thing in our swimming pool here, but it should be much more global. And when you're talking global, you're talking US. It should be US-led initiative to bring, first of all, the agencies, but all the relevant players. And I think Israel can play a big, strong role in that, not just the Mediterranean, but understanding how to get public and private sectors together in a sector like that.
You mentioned US and Israel working and collaborating. I want to pull at that thread a little bit more. How can you see the US and Israel collaborating more on the maritime space, and how can it be mutually beneficial to both of us?
Well, I must say that things, initiatives and actions are taken in my term and even after my term, in my successor term, many moves with the Coast Guard and with the other U.S. Federal agencies, and even with some like the RAND Foundation and things like that, that pour money into to fuel solutions in this area. So I think US and Israel is a good example of how long distance but close friends governments can work. But it should be higher and bottom up and top down, meaning that you need the seaports, the major seaports. You need the vendors and supply chain to seaports. You mentioned cranes. We'll talk a lot about cranes because, yes, it's a critical element. But all the information, all the networks and info systems, you can cripple a seaport. Just remember the Maersk incident back in, I think, 2017, 2016. Just deleting all the containers identities or mixing them. I think until today, whole batches of whole medicines are gone for good, probably somewhere physically, for sure. They didn't go sink down to the ocean, but nobody knows in which of the containers they are. That's an easy way, and I can disclose that because it was published, but you can do much, much worse than that. And
Yes.
that
Data
we
and
all work,
disruption to operations. Ports
yeah,
are unfortunately for
and we
our
all work on
exports,
the same
great. Yeah.
systems. Yeah, we all work on the same system, on the same software, mostly. That's even the basic reason why we should work at least on that. And Israel and US are doing that for a time, but it needs a boost. It needs a boost, and not just Israel and US. We're, together, Israel and US, we are the biggest economy in the world. But we need to get more. Yeah, it was a joke. We can get more to the table to make sure that the traceability, the like-minded, transparency, and understanding the attack surface is doing properly. Israeli ships are going, like American ships, going everywhere, almost everywhere. You don't know where you're going to get infected, or when you're going to get crippled, when your GPS is going to get out of order. That's why we need a global alliance, a global effort to make sure that the critical elements, not everything, but the critical elements in the maritime technology will be by design, and if not, afterwards will be on at least a basic level of cybersecurity.
Agreed. And we just talked about how there's going to be more and more technology. We didn't even touch on the integration of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence within the maritime space. What do you see as the biggest benefits and the risks to ports in the maritime transportation coming over the next few years?
Well, I think that the main thing probably will be unmanned shipping. It's already a very skeletonic cruise over ships around the world. And the next trivial thing will be to completely remove the human factor out of it, and more even in ports. And that's a great thing. It can not just save manpower, but mainly enlarge the capacity of everything, because you don't need crews to relax or doing mistakes. Like any other technology, any emerging technology comes with a price, and this price must be taken care of. And that's, of course, much more vulnerable and much more fragile to cyber attacks, to intervention by unwanted elements. And I think I saw that in Singapore. They are, by the way, by design, building an unmanned supply chain, let's say, ecosystem of unmanned shipping. And I think that's something that maybe we can even discard the current generation of shipping and push harder to jump to the next generation of unmanned vehicles as soon as possible, because maybe we can do that by design much safer than the legacy current fleets that we have.
But what I'm hearing throughout this discussion is greater information sharing, focusing on the key technologies which are going to drive the modernization and efficiency of ports, thinking about security by design before the technology comes into the ports and not after. I think a lot of times we're finding vulnerabilities after technology has been put in place and trying to bolt security on after the fact. So starting from a position of, as we add technology into our maritime system, thinking about security by design up front and by default, and then information sharing, improving our information sharing around those key technologies for collective defense. Because as you said, it's, the maritime and shipping industry of the US is not separate from that of Israel, of that from Cyprus and Singapore and our friends in Scandinavia. We're all going everywhere. We're all using similar technologies. We all face similar risk. So how do we as a global community address those? I think some of it is what we've talked about, best practices that we've seen in other sectors, applying it to maritime. Again, looking more on
Yes,
that
and
public-private partnership and driving forward there.
absolutely. And if I may say to emphasize or to conclude the main message, and I don't need to convince the forum here because you are here, but it's still very rare to find a professional, wide range, wide scale forums dealing with that. We need to raise awareness. We need decision makers. We need governments. We need academia. We need everyone to realize, in the first place, there's a threat, and there's a growing threat, and we can be stuck without medicines and the critical supplies if we don't take care of that yesterday, if not yesterday, so today. But yes, awareness, raising awareness by you guys, all the participants here, Trend Micro, thank you for the chance to raise it a little louder.
Great, and thank you for your time this morning, y'all. I think we set the stage for the rest of the webinar. I always feel like we're the Debbie Downers talking about the risks and the threats that we face, but I think we're going to pivot into some of the operational and actual boots on the ground practices we can take to address the risks that Yigal and I have been discussing. So I'm excited to turn it back now to my colleague Ross
Thank
for
you.
the next part of the webinar.
Thank you, guys. We appreciate it. All right, next we're going to hear from the Government Accountability Office. So let me quick introduction. So the U.S. Government Accountability Office, we've got Tina Wan Sherman, the Director for Homeland Security and Justice at GAO. So we're excited to hear about a recent report she released on February 11th, 2025. So hot off the presses. It's part of the audit that they do with the Coast Guard as mandated by law. And we're excited to hear what Tina has to say and dig in with some questions on the back end. So Tina, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ross. Hi, everyone. So as Ross noted, my name is Tina Wan Sherman, and I wanted to give you a little bit of a background with respect to GAO for a moment, and then I'll talk actually about how we conduct our work and how we conducted our work in particular for a recent review and report that we published looking at cybersecurity in the maritime transportation system. So the U.S. Government Accountability Office, GAO, is the investigative arm of Congress. And what we're able to do is we're able to follow the federal dollar and ensure compliance with laws and regulations when it comes to federal agencies, their specific programs and activities that they conduct. So as we're conducting our reviews, we would identify areas for improvement. We often make recommendations to those agencies to help improve either the performance of their programs, the efficiency, cost effectiveness, and other considerations. And then agencies oftentimes will act in response to our recommendations. We then issue our reports publicly, and then we also brief Congress on the findings of our work. And actually, so just pivoting to that for a minute, almost all of our work is programmed by Congress, either through law, where we have a reporting requirement to look at a particular issue, or through a request letter that we receive from leadership on both sides of the aisle, and both in the House and the Senate and Congress. And so for this most recent cybersecurity review looking at the MTS, it was actually a reporting requirement in law from the fiscal year 2023 National Defense Authorization Act. And it asked us to take a look at the risks, cybersecurity risks to the MTS. So we went about doing that in 4 different areas. Before I talk about those 4 areas, I do also just want to mention how we went about doing our work. And this is pretty typical for all of the work that we would conduct for Congress. So we not only met with, spoke to Coast Guard officials, and reviewed, plethora of information that they provided us about their work and how they help to ensure cybersecurity in the MTS. We also conducted site visits. So we went to 4 different locations, or spoke with, in at least one instance, we spoke with virtually to talk about and observe inspections that are conducted by the Coast Guard. So we met with Coast Guard officials at those particular sectors. We also spoke with owners and operators of port facilities and vessels. And then we also spoke with officials who serve on our area or the area maritime security committees that are associated with those particular sectors. So we don't just, pull up a bunch of documents or make a request and take a look at that and make findings to an agency. We actually collect information, have conversations, go back and ask for more insights, ask for more information. And again, like the boots on the ground perspective, go and actually observe some of the activities that are carried out. And then we take all of that to help inform what we learn and what we ultimately, might recommend. So the 4 areas that we looked at for this particular review, we looked at threats to the MTS, cybersecurity threats, and the reporting of cyber incidents. We took a look at deficiencies that are identified as part of the Coast Guard's inspection process, and how those are recorded. We took a look at the essentially strategic planning efforts for the Coast Guard when it comes to cybersecurity. And then finally, we looked at the workforce, the cybersecurity workforce within the Coast Guard. And we focused a lot on competencies. So going to the first area, just wanting to talk a minute about threats. This is not going to be new to anyone. And certainly Gal already talked a little bit about some of them. So we walk through and identify the range of threats and threat actors to the MTS, in particular when it comes to the actors, just highlighting nation states, transnational organized criminals, hacktivists, insiders. So talking through those as some of the key threat actors that the MTS is increasingly experiencing cyber attacks from. And then we also talked about the reporting piece of incidents. And so for owners and operators, there are it's voluntary in terms of the ability or interest or need to report out on cybersecurity incidents. So what we found is, the threshold in some ways can vary in terms of that reporting. So for one particular port, for example, it may not have risen in their mind to the level of a cybersecurity incident that they felt that they would need to report. And so they may or may not have done that. And then if they did report it, the information that comes in to the Coast Guard, we found wasn't always necessarily accurate. So the Coast Guard does collect and has a list of cybersecurity incidents that it oversees. However, when we took a look at that list for the incidents that were reported over the past few years, we found that some of those incidents, it was unclear whether or not there were actual cybersecurity related vulnerabilities that resulted from the incident. Some of the incidents were physical incidents, and so weren't really cybersecurity focused. And there were, a couple of other areas that we highlighted that demonstrated that the list really wasn't accurate. So the reason for that, we found, was that there weren't procedures in place for the Coast Guard to ensure that the information they were collecting, what they were including on that list, was really complete and accurate. So we recommended that they implement procedures so that they have better information and a recording of incidents, which is really the only way they're going to be able to understand the bigger picture of what types of incidents are occurring in the MTS and potentially how to address them. The second area has to do with inspection. So the Coast Guard conducts inspections of facilities and vessels. Those inspections are much broader than cybersecurity. They're inspections that they've been doing for a number of years, well before cybersecurity. This is, again, also, as I was noting earlier, but really became a thing and that term coined. In fact, the inspections go back to the Maritime Transportation Security Act of 2002. And it was only actually until 2018 that there was even really discussion, and as they amended the MTSA, of cybersecurity to have, as part of the inspection process, the Coast Guard take a look at whether or not facilities and vessels were identifying cybersecurity risks and including them in their security plans. Now, what that didn't include were any specific requirements for consistent risks that they might be looking at and how to mitigate those risks. It's really up to the owners and operators to make the determination as to whether or not they have a cybersecurity risk and what they would do to address that. When we asked the Coast Guard for information in their system of record about these deficiencies that were identified in the cybersecurity space, and again, it's pretty limited, the information that we got back, again, it wasn't robust. And we found that they were not really able to mine that information in a way that would help them make decisions about where they could perhaps provide additional assistance or support to help address those risks for owners and operators. So we made a recommendation to help them or ask them to improve their recording of those deficiencies. And in fact, the only other thing I want to highlight that before I move on to the last two is that it's only until January of this year has the Coast Guard had regulations in place for cybersecurity. So there are now regulations that require owners and operators to conduct a variety of cybersecurity risk assessments, costs, analysis, and mitigation strategies in a consistent, standardized fashion that hasn't been there previously. And the January 2025 regulations actually aren't going to be taking effect until July. So we're still in the space where owners and operators of within the maritime transportation system are not even starting to take steps to ensure cybersecurity or the improvements of cybersecurity on that more consistent, more detailed fashion, but they will be shortly. The last two areas, so the third I'd mentioned was around strategy, having a national cybersecurity strategy or some strategic efforts to ensure cybersecurity within the MTS. And the Coast Guard has several documents. They have a cyber strategic outlook and an implementation plan that they've used for this purpose to help assess and manage risk. And then they also have a maritime security plan that they use as well. And we took a look at those three. So that really encompasses their strategy, according to Coast Guard, those three particular plans. And what we learned in taking a look at them was that we found that they were missing most of the key characteristics of an effective strategy, national strategy, based on criteria that we have worked at GAO to develop over time and have applied to other strategies, to other federal agencies, to other sectors. The one area that they had fully addressed across those three plans really was kind of at a basic level around defining purpose and scope and how to approach some of the planning and risk assessment activities. But in all five of the other areas, they were lacking. So that included everything from clearly stating roles and responsibilities for being able to be strategic in managing risk when it comes to cybersecurity and identifying resources, and a number of other key characteristics. So we recommended that they take a look at those strategy documents and ensure that the various key characteristics of a national strategy are incorporated across them so they can be more effective in their efforts. The last area around the workforce, the Coast Guard has cybersecurity specialists, and they have cyber protection teams that largely comprise their workforce to address cybersecurity. And in taking a look at that particular workforce, we found that, in addition to some challenges they have with competing with the private sector in terms of vacancies and being able to fill the positions, that they hadn't really closely examined what needs, current and future needs for competencies for those specific cybersecurity roles were important to include. So they hadn't revisited that in any recent past. And they also hadn't taken a look at existing competencies to identify gaps. So where are there gaps in what you were expecting the skills and competencies to be for your workforce? And what are you doing to address that? So we made a couple of recommendations in those areas as well. So I think that was the overview. I'll pause there and then maybe toss it back to Ross for some questions.
Great. Let's get into it. So we've got about 7 to 10 minutes before we go into our last panel. So we'll run through these questions pretty quickly. So I want to start back up at the top. MTS, Maritime Transportation System. That means a large number of things. And depending on who you ask in that ecosystem, not everybody's got a full grasp of what is included in that. So question one, when we say MTS, what's the world we're looking at here?
Yeah, so we would couch it as taking into consideration like the range of ports, rivers, waterways, and all of the vessels and facilities that move in and out of those spaces. But also, it's important to note that the Coast Guard serves as, or the Department of Homeland Security with the Coast Guard being delegated the authority, serves as the sector risk management agency for the MTS. And so when it comes to the role the DHS has with those vessels and facilities and ports along those rivers and waterways, the role that the Coast Guard plays is to be the lead in helping to plan for and manage risks to critical infrastructure more broadly. But of course, cybersecurity is a huge piece of that.
Yep. And that leads into the next question, which is how do they partner with other organizations, right? I mean, when you say they're the lead, that assumes that there's other folks who are helping, right? Whether it's people operating in the MTS themselves or folks at state level governments, folks in the Homeland Security, other folks in the Homeland Security space. How do you see those organizations interrelating and operating together?
Yeah, so similar to other critical infrastructure sectors, it's been largely voluntary up till, the January rulemaking with completion of the rulemaking with the regulations, right? So it's a voluntary partnership. So Coast Guard, except for that very minimal requirement that I had mentioned from the amendment to the MTSA, the Coast Guard has had to work to establish relationships with information sharing entities, with port owners and operators, across the private sector, to be able to not only share information, but be able to provide some level of support and assessment as needed. And so, you know, that voluntary environment or voluntary framework always remains a challenge. And the relationship building piece is really critical. When we spoke with different area maritime security committees and different sectors, the answer varied. Some were open to and partner pretty regularly with the Coast Guard, seeing them as an ally and being able to get information and, you know, training and support from them. Others, not necessarily, right? There's some level of skepticism because you're essentially a regulator as well. And so it's, you know, really the value is in the Coast Guard's ability to build those strong partnerships with the private sector and with these other entities.
The Coast Guard's been in this role for a while now, almost a decade at least, right? With the question though, your report takes a snapshot of the Coast Guard's efforts, 2023 through 2024. That's the audit time frame. Given the Coast Guard's role over the last several years and the continued role going forward, can you help us understand what are some of the IT, OT, GPS systems that have come into play since the Coast Guard started this? Like, what are we seeing now? Are we seeing increased adoption of interconnected technologies at ports? What is the main driver, and how is Coast Guard approaching that continued digitization of what was a less digitized system before?
Yeah, so while we conducted our review during that window that you mentioned, the 23-24 window, we did look at historical data on incidents, on deficiencies identified as part of inspections and so forth. But absolutely, the MTS space and the cybersecurity posture has become increasingly interconnected. So some of the technologies for the you know, at a high level, right, are the information technology that's used, the operational technology, and then Yigal was talking before about GPS and that also being critical. So you have technologies like automatic identification technologies that are used to identify the movement of and location of ships that are, for example, approaching a port and the speed with which they're approaching it, and they're communicating back and forth. You have operational technology that's used at the terminal to ensure the movement of equipment throughout the terminal itself. And then you have also something like I was mentioning earlier, talking about ship-to-shore cranes and the remote use of it. And I know that's also something that has popped up quite a bit in this particular realm over the past couple of years. And so having remotely located access to those ship-to-shore cranes to be able to move cargo to and from ships that are at port. So it's a lot, and it's not something that you can really entangle or disentangle. And even a lot of, you know, it's the physical and cyber piece that is interconnected when it comes to this, you know, critical infrastructure within the MTS.
So I think we've got one more question, time for about one more question, but I'm going to combine two of the ones we discussed before. So big footprint, you just laid it out fairly nicely for the audience. Two questions, or one, does the Coast Guard have the ability to cover this large footprint as is? And what I mean by that is, do they have the current staffing? Help us understand what the two teams are that they have operating, and help us understand what the staffing structure looks like. I know you said that there was in the report a 15% deficit in the workforce over there. And then the other question is, from a partnership standpoint, we talked a little bit about it before. Do they have the ability to partner with folks? Do they have the ability to partner with people that are on this call right now? And is there a way for them to do that successfully?
Yeah. So the first question, it is a big footprint. I mean, even before cybersecurity has a big footprint, just considering how much the maritime transportation system includes. And so talking about the workforce that the Coast Guard has, so they have these cybersecurity specialists and they have cyber protection teams. Cybersecurity specialists are located in various areas, districts, and sectors, and they help provide training, information sharing, and specific support when the Coast Guard is conducting those facility and vessel inspections. The cyber protection teams are located, essentially located within Coast Guard like headquarters and are deployed to any owner or operator who would like to have some type of a cybersecurity assessment. So it's voluntary, there's no cost to it. And what they would do is they conduct testing and then they provide a report to those particular owners and operators. Across both of those, the specialists and the teams, we found that there was a 15% vacancy rate. Not entirely surprising, and as we learned when we were talking with individuals across the country, competing with the private sector for cybersecurity positions is challenging when it comes to pay, among other things. So the Coast Guard knows that and is of course trying to take steps to increase their workforce and increase the recruitment. But it is a challenging task and it's going to continue to grow. One final thought about that, and then kind of pivoting to the partnership piece, is with these regulations from January that will be taking effect in July, there's much more of an incentive, in fact, more than an incentive, right? A mandate to need to have a more robust cybersecurity workforce in order to ensure compliance with cybersecurity regulations by the Coast Guard. And that teeth also applies to this partnership piece. In some ways, partnership is key, but it's going to go beyond that. It's not going to be this voluntary partnership with limited requirements. It's going to be more than that. And what it's going to be important to do is for the Coast Guard to really ensure that it can oversee how those regulations are going to be implemented. But again, the partnerships, the interactions, they're critical, right? You still need to bring owners and operators along, especially in the first couple of years, because they are going to need to figure out how to address those regulations. How are they going to pay for them? What's the best way to address them? And so, that partnership piece is still going to be there. It's just going to be under a regulatory environment.
Great. Well, I think that is about all the time we have. I see folks putting questions in the chat. Thank you for doing that. If you have other questions for Tina, for other folks, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We're going to record them. We'd like to be able to get back to you if we can. I also want to take a quick moment while we're thanking Tina to remind folks that this is a CLE opportunity. So this code, if you're here to get your CLE, is Maritime 2025, MARITIME 2025. So I'll say it again at the end of the discussion. All right. Thank you again, Tina. We appreciate it. We look forward to continuing to read the reports that you guys are working on and hear more about the work you're doing. So with that, we're going to pivot over to Stacey O'Mara, and I'll let her introduce the panel that they have for you, some owners and operators to tell us how to fix everything. Thanks, Stacey.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much, Ross. Great to be here. This has been a great scene setter for this final portion of the program. We started really broad with Caitlin and Yugel on the broad geopolitical picture and got a really good assessment from Tina and Ross on, how the government is assessing this industry right now. What are some of the risks and findings? And as Ross indicated, we are going to talk with some of our folks who are representing operators. My name is Stacey O'Mara. I am the Senior Director for Cybersecurity Services here at Venable. Just joined this great crew back in January, but have been working in the cybersecurity cybersecurity industry for about a decade and previously ran government affairs for Mandiant and FireEye. So I'm delighted to be here with some other public and private sector partners over the years. I'm going to toss it over to our three panelists to do quick introductions, and then we're going to dive right into a conversation. Nir, you want to go ahead and kick us off, please?
Yes, good morning. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's an honor to be here today. For those that I haven't met yet, I'm Nir Dalyat. I served as the Deputy CISO for the city of San Diego. My role wasn't just about protecting networks. It was about protecting a city, and in many cases, people. During my time there, I led cyber operations through real-world incidents, including the 2016 MLB All-Star Game attack, and several major ransomware campaigns that later included a 2018 SamSam attack on the port of San Diego, and was the privilege to support Robert Rinzali, former CISO for the port, in his efforts as much as I possibly could at the time. And I was closely collaborating with the FBI, DHS, regional law enforcement units to make sense of the threats that we were facing. Today, I serve as the program lead for the Bird Foundation initiative at Trend Micro, where I'm basically primary point on the project, which is also happens to be the name of the platform, called Maritime One. It started as a technology pilot that grew into a broader effort to help cities, ports, and allied nations work together to build digital resilience. And I'm here today to talk about threats, and not just about threats, but people, because I often say cybersecurity isn't just about fixing systems, it's about protecting lives.
Thanks so much, Nir. Milton?
Awesome. Hello, my name is Milton Corney. I am the IT program manager for the Port of South Louisiana. We're one of the ports in Louisiana located about 25 minutes to 30 minutes away from New Orleans. I'm responsible for the IT operations and cyber operations for the port, and managing our cyber team. And I'm here to speak about the cybersecurity threats facing the maritime industry, specifically infrastructure.
Thank you. And finally, Holden.
Hi there. Thank you. Glad to be here. My name is Holden Haley. I work for the American Association of Port Authorities. We are the nation's voice of the seaports trade association. I am a legislative associate. I cover the security and cybersecurity portfolio, and I've been covering that portfolio for about 2 years now.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here with us. So as I mentioned, we've got a great overview so far into this session. And what this group is really going to do is kind of focus more on some themes that have been fleshed out so far. So what does it mean to manage cyber risk in this sector? What are some of the policy implications that we're seeing out of the new administration and the new Congress? And then also, again, pulling on a lot of what Tina was talking about, what is the importance of public-private sector partnerships and how have those models been evolving over time? So I want to do a little bit of scene setting here in addition to what we've already heard. I think most of us in the cybersecurity space realize that we are really moving away from these one-off cyber attacks to long-term persistent campaigns from nation state actors. And it really requires us to think outside the box and leverage all of the tools in our toolbox, and to also stress the importance of this concept of public-private sector partnership, which I would surmise has evolved more into public-private sector collaboration. And there are various models and various ways to do that. And you're going to hear that get fleshed out throughout this conversation with these gentlemen. I do want to hit a little bit more on this sector in general. So you got a little bit of a taste for how big it is from Tina, but I want to double tap that a couple of times, thinking about the maritime ecosystem in general, not so much as how big it is, but also so you can take into consideration the attack surface, right? So the American Association of Port Authorities, Holden's organization, put out a report in March 2024. I'm just going to give you some data points here. In 2023, imports into and exports out of the U.S. amounted to $5.1 trillion in goods. This represents about 20% of the United States economy. About $2.1 trillion worth of those goods represent about 20% of the economy and pass through U.S. ports. The port and maritime industry's total economic contribution to the U.S. includes an estimated 2.5 million workers. This is the people piece that Nir mentioned, all right, earning about $214 billion in wages and benefits. And this industry is more than just ports. For example, this economy has significantly interconnected supply chains. Tina mentioned this as well. The public administration fosters a secure and resilient maritime supply chain, and the government agencies, including the Coast Guard and Custom and Border Protection, both fall under the Department of Homeland Security, patrol U.S. waters and ensure the safe passage of both people and goods. And additionally, this is part of that model, the public-private sector piece. State and local governments play a role here as well, and they've spent in 2023 about $7 billion on sea and inland port facilities. So you can imagine kind of the vastness of here, what we're dealing with. So I'm going to cover kind of what does the threat landscape look like? What are these models for partnership? And then we'll get into some of the business and economic impacts of what we're dealing with here. So let me start off here, Milton, and I'm going to go to you first based on your role in the port down there. What are some of the most critical cybersecurity threats that are facing maritime infrastructure today?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Some of the most critical threats that I know about from collaborating and conducting information sharing with other CISOs in the maritime industry are specifically phishing and social engineering, along with ransomware attacks, right? All of these leading up to financial fraud.
Thank you. And how are they targeting the ports, Milton? What are some of the vectors that you guys are seeing? Aside from phishing, anything else, anything more sophisticated, or is it kind of basic attacks that we've been accustomed to over time?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of the attacks are still basic attacks that can be mitigated by implementing better cyber hygiene, right? Implementing frameworks and having better governance, implementing policies and procedures to prevent that click in the email that may lead to your network infrastructure being infected, or also putting policies in place in the finance department that would prevent a third-party vendor's email that was compromised from sending an email to you saying, hey, look, we need to update our banking information, and therefore that money being sent to the incorrect, bank account that's controlled by a bad actor or a nation state.
Holden, can you tell me, based some of your members, what are some of the threats that they're seeing? What are some of the trends that you're seeing for attack vectors?
So, I mean, I'm sure as all of us know, ports are, a very critical part of the supply chain and are just constantly targets. I mean, even here in our office, we are targets of spoofing attempts, pretending to be, somebody in our organization trying to get passwords, brute force attacks. I've heard, without putting any one port on blast, there was a recent cyber attack this year at a port that was able to be mitigated. They, entities pretending to be port workers, getting passwords, getting into the system, and just not even necessarily trying to impact operations, but just trying to lie in wait and see what systems they can access. And yeah, so that's something that's happened this year that we've heard about.
Holden, maybe I just want to go like one layer deeper here. What are some of the infrastructure and hardware risks that seaports and maritime industry faces? For example, the U.S. dealing with Chinese equipment or the lack of Wi-Fi availability.
Right. So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of, and it's been discussed on this call, ship-to-shore cranes are one particular piece of hardware that, because of its manufacture in China, because of its importance in the operations of ports, literally physically moving the containers off of the boats into the port, that has been one key aspect where, where litigators have been, really concerned about. I would only highlight that, from the 50,000 point view, it's not quite confirmed whether or not, ship-to-shore cranes pose a, cyber threat, but perhaps the concentration of the manufacturing in one sole source manufacturer, that is the real threat. But certainly, as more and more, I apologize, there is the Port of San Diego, I'm not kidding, is visiting the office and walking through. So near your old colleagues are
Bring them
here.
in.
Yeah, I would.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you. Nir, I'd be curious too, from your perspective, based on, kind of the evolution of your time in this space, not only what are some of the threats that you're seeing, but what are those vectors, particularly from a cybersecurity vendor's perspective at this point?
It's nothing new. It's the same thing as it's been before, email. It's been the easiest way to get in. Anyone who's spent enough time shadowing staff, employees, and seeing how many times you get that Control-Alt-Delete and how fast did they have to work, and not really quote unquote paying attention to it, they'll click. It's human nature. So at the end of the day, that email becomes the shortest path to basically taking over target, or from a customer's perspective and operations perspective, have someone that will champion you unintentionally and allow you to then navigate the infrastructure without any consequences to it. The one thing I want to just highlight, because it seems like the feedback from Milton and Holden just kind of converged, that everything we've talked about so far feels like it all started just around the SamSam attack in 2018, Port of San Diego. I just want to put that out there to explain that throughout that period of time, starting with 2018, leading up to today, the thing that really made a difference was communication and information sharing. I want to emphasize that, because without communication, without that level of, at least level of transparency that allows you to share a certain amount of details, without compromising investigations, without pointing anyone to be the guilty party, blasting San Diego, as Holden just said, without information sharing, you're not going to be able to do a whole lot. It's wonderful to get all this threat information. It's wonderful to get zero-day knowledge and or having the intent from operators to collaborate, but you can't have that all the time. It's not always possible without the MOUs, right? So information sharing is critical. And then the knowledge on how to be able to respond when you have an incident is even more critical. And that becomes another pivot opportunity to why the human factor here is so important. I just wanted to highlight that. Hand you back.
Oh, thank you for that. And we're going to pull on that thread a little bit as we move into the discussion on public-private sector collaboration. Before we jump to that, though, Holden, I want to go back to something that Tina was talking about in the GAO's reporting around what ports are doing to develop cybersecurity strategies and plans. How are they managing and assessing risk right now? How are they thinking about doing this? Are they doing it on a regular basis? Are they struggling? Do they need help? Do they need resources to do that?
Thank you. Yeah, I actually really appreciated hearing from Tina. Just broadly, what we've heard from our members is that they are very supportive of Coast Guard Cyber Command. I think all of us, though, in the industry recognize that there's a lot of room for that mission to grow. And that's kind of what I heard from, Tina, was that there are some things that absolutely could be improved upon. I would only want to highlight that that's the regulator's information collection capabilities. That's not necessarily reflective of what ports and operators are actually doing themselves. And, I would only want to highlight that for that new regulation, cybersecurity in the MTS, that's been in development for the last few years. Ports, we submitted comments when it was an NPRM. And, as we've flagged this to our members, they have let us know overwhelmingly that, they exceed those minimum thresholds. Now, they are just the port authorities themselves. Some of them are landlord ports. Some of them do operate. Can't speak necessarily for the MTOs, the marine terminal operators, the private companies that might be at the ports themselves. But if there was anybody concerned by, any of that, I would just want to say that ports are very confident in their ability to not just meet, but exceed the upcoming regulations that are set to go into effect July 16th. So what are some of the things that ports can do to information share? There are several ways. There's the MTS ISAC. There's, even internally at AAPA, we have committees that bring together. Milton serves on one of them and attends. We have not just an IT committee, but we have a security committee that's physical security, and there is an overlap. So we even now have a subcommittee on cybersecurity that pulls from both. And I know that at DHS that there are also ways to share information, facilitated by DHS.
Right, absolutely. So this takes us right into the next topic. And I kind of want to stick with you, Holden, because I want to hear too, as far as the different authorities that, or I'm sorry, government regulations and other compliance frameworks that are out there right now. We do see that the administration and the United States Congress are starting to think about how we might change those or update them or amend them. And what we're really seeing as far as congressional priorities is, regulatory harmonization, and to your point, sharing information within DHS and reporting incidents. So CERCIA. What are you hearing from your members? How are you all reacting to some of these changes? A lot of CI owners and operators are overwhelmed by the number of reporting requirements related to incidents. Some of these entities are going through the worst day of their professional careers, managing an attack, and just want to get their operations back online. And you're navigating through a sea of requirements and making sure you're going to the right individuals. So tell us a little bit about how the industry is responding to some of these congressional inquiries into how we're doing reporting and information sharing.
Thank you for highlighting that. Absolutely. There are, as it's currently written, CERCIA, just duplicative reporting requirements. And as you pointed out, for some of these ransomware attacks and for some of the, cyber incidents that there is even, not necessarily clarity over the threshold of what qualifies as a reportable cyber incident. That was one of the comments that we made seeking clarity on, is a spoofing attempt a reportable cyber incident, or, is somebody just getting access to an employee's username, but not necessarily interrupting operations and password? Is that a reportable cyber incident? And if there was actual incident in which things are being shut down and you're having, like you said, the worst day of your life, now having to have duplicative reporting requirements to both CISA and to our normal regulator, the Coast Guard, it adds frustration. It adds time to where every second counts. And that's one thing that we've heard from our members across the board is, as Congress is, kind of leaned into reducing some of that duplication and seeking feedback from industry. Overwhelmingly, ports have said that they prefer, the reporting requirements to go through the Coast Guard. There is a muscle memory there for physical security incidents to go straight to the Coast Guard and seeking aid. They want to kind of build on that. As you know, many port workers in IT or in security are actually retired coasties. And so they have those relationships. They have that trust there and they trust the Coast Guard to not, trust them whenever they're talking about information sharing and things like that. They want to share with people that they have already good relationships with.
Yeah, that's certainly a really important part of the debate right now over reporting incidents. And as Tina mentioned, the Coast Guard is a sector risk management agency over this industry, and this is the same across all critical infrastructure sectors. And it does, at the end of the day, end up becoming about that human factor, those relationships, those trusted partnerships where, you're getting the assistance that you need. But of course, as part of this public-private sector partnership and collaboration, there are other entities that are involved as well, especially when you're thinking about criminal activity and whether or not you want to be involving law enforcement agencies, for example. And what does it mean to have a relationship not only with your SRMA and CISA, for example, but also the FBI. And then, of course, working with state and local and municipalities that are involved with your particular port. And then finally, Milton made this point earlier, communicating and sharing information with your counterparts and your colleagues at other ports to find out what's going on in that sector. Is everything lighting up like a Christmas tree like we're seeing over here right now? So I want to stick to the authorities piece real quick though. Milton, these are some of the things that we're looking at a macro level here in DC right now. But Milton, can you talk to us a little bit about some of the cybersecurity oversight for tenants? What is that looking like these days?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that ties back into the Coast Guard's cybersecurity requirements that will be what date is that again? What
July 16th.
July
Yeah.
16th. So we've been in conversations with our tenants. We are a lease landlord port, speaking with them on and off about their cyber requirements, frameworks, and also the Coast Guard regulations to make sure that we are synced and on the same page when it comes to incident response, reporting cybersecurity issues, and also if they need help from us, even though we're not liable from that standpoint of the port is not liable for their network because it's segmented, meaning they have their own network and they have their own endpoints, but we would like to make sure that they are following the Coast Guard regulations as far as the cybersecurity requirements are concerned.
Thank you. So I just want to make another note about, these emerging models for public-private sector partnership. And I think we kind of saw a little bit of this with Ukraine when, again, thinking back to what Yugal and Caitlin were discussing, really kind of zooming out and thinking about how all of us are responding to some of these geopolitical conflicts of which the U.S. becomes involved in at times and could potentially in the future. And we really kind of see like direct commercial engagements where you have companies like where NEAR is supporting right now at Trend Micro, who are doing direct commercial engagements with government entities. You have kind of the voluntary models, which Holden and Milton have alluded to with respect to sharing information with federal government agencies like CISA. And then you also kind of have like this esprit de corps, like what are you doing amongst your trusted friends, colleagues, and partners within the industry to share information. So it's been kind of fascinating watching that over the past couple of years and thinking about how we can apply some of those lessons learned back here at home. So let me switch to, again, thinking about some of, how the government is working with private sector. Near how can ports leverage government funding like Bird Foundation grants for certain cybersecurity initiatives? And then Milton, I'd love to toss it over to you as well to tell us about some of your experience and your role there, how you've been leveraging federal government resources.
Yes, thank you, Stacy. The Bird Foundation supports U.S.-Israel joint innovation projects. They offer quite an investment per each project, and ports can partner with technology innovators, in this case like Trend Micro and Riskana, to essentially co-develop cybersecurity solutions with no upfront cost. And if accepted into the program over a certain period of time, you have an opportunity to essentially access the innovation, early access to the innovation, and then have actual impact on shaping the tools. And outside of that, it actually brings us, interestingly, to what we talked about yesterday, and Holden can actually shed some more light on the different programs now that amplify how the Bird program is one venue, one path into this partnership with how can private industry or players like Trend Micro and Riskana help the seaports partner into submitting for grants, applying for grants with these programs, something I wasn't even necessarily aware of in such a clear framework until you guys shared it yesterday.
I can definitely, I'm happy to highlight the Port of Los Angeles is an excellent example of, public-private partnership through the Cyber Resilience Center. That is one program that Port of Los Angeles is very proud about, and it's meant to be replicable for other ports and, across the nation to kind of adopt and hopefully start to be proactive about, cyber incidents and hardening the resilience against incidents.
Thank you, Holden. Milton, can you just briefly describe for us kind of what your interactions have been with some of these federal grant programs and how it's been supporting you and your mission there?
Yeah, of course. So just to give a little bit more information on the port security grants, and I'm sure Holden can emphasize and give more details about this. My interactions with the federal port security grants are around cybersecurity specifically. With those grants, we were able to have funding to acquire industry standard cybersecurity tools to better protect our networks and also protect the organization's information, right? And also services through cybersecurity vendors. It's been very helpful in that aspect. Also, once we acquire those services or licenses, software, platform licenses, the ongoing costs can be covered by federal security sustainment funds. And I'm pretty sure Holden can give you more information on that, but it helps the budget overall for the organization.
Thank you for that. What's so fascinating about this, Caitlin, Clark, and I, who you saw at the top of this program, we met and worked this program and others years ago, and seeing the evolution of those programs, and now cybersecurity is included as an allowable cost under that program is great. And this is across multiple sectors, so it's a great resource. Holden, if there's anything you want to kind of put a final stamp on that program or other federal grants, go ahead.
Only to say that, thank you. Only to say that it is actually under threat right now because it's a very critical program. Port Security Grant Program is one example. Cooperative agreements going back to 2021 with FEMA at DHS. Currently, we just had a security committee call yesterday, and I'm hearing that ports, relying on that fund, drawing down on it, it is not being reimbursed. And so there's actually a pause on that. And so, our members are basically sounding the alarm that this critical program that they rely on is under threat. So I just want to put a bow on it. I would say that this really important tools like Milton is highlighting, there are no sacred cows, I guess, in the current administration.
No, thank you for that. And that actually highlights the state and local cybersecurity grant program as well, which was enacted a couple of years ago. There's also consideration for rethinking how those funds are being used as well. And so state and local municipalities can take advantage of that funding and push it down to ports as well, we're in an interesting time. We are seeing trends from the administration. We had a recent executive order that would divest some of the cybersecurity efforts down to the states. So I think there is a little bit of retooling and rethinking about how some of these efforts are being managed. So these are critical programs that fall into that we need to continue talking about. So thank you, gentlemen, for highlighting. I'm going to jump down to kind of the business and economic impacts here, right? Like when we think about cybersecurity, some of the attacks that we're seeing, some of the geopolitical events that we're seeing in the world today, really begs us to think about cybersecurity also from a national security perspective as well, but importantly, economic security too. So let me start with you, Milton. What are some of the financial risks that are associated with cyber attacks on ports?
Yeah, that's a great question. So based on the information I'm getting again from other CISOs and also companies in the maritime industry, and also speaking with insurance agencies and agents, one of the consequences for I guess you can say, immature cybersecurity program at an organization could lead to higher premiums or even an insurance company dropping your cybersecurity insurance, right? And actually, the opposite is also true. If you have a mature cybersecurity program at your organization, your premiums are lowered. So there is a financial incentive to implement cybersecurity and make it a priority at your organization.
Thank you for that. Holden, how does improved cybersecurity enhance operational resilience and competitiveness in the maritime industry? Do we see these investments in cybersecurity driving maritime traffic or port usage at all?
Well, certainly. I mean, if there is a slowdown, a supply chain crisis, I mean, the truth is that the carriers, the actual companies like MSC or Maersk, they have a choice a lot of the times in which port that they go to. And the ports are constantly competing with one another for cargo volumes, not just US ports, but with Canada and Mexico. And so when you have delays, when you have a terminal shut down, even for a day, the carriers, that impacts who they call to. And that ultimately impacts the revenue that the ports can raise and support their, new projects, support their staff, being able to develop, importing new technology and equipment. And so it's really, I should say, an investment in, investing in cybersecurity, like the Cyber Resilience Center, is investing in making sure in your growth as a port. And so, especially when, it's very fierce competition with who they can call to.
Thank you. Nir, what are the roles that the private sector technology or services companies play in driving cybersecurity innovation in the maritime industry? How are people seeing ports and public sector personnel leveraging those private sector services or solutions to shore up their cyber defenses? You're on mute, Nir.
Of course I am. That's the one opportunity for my contribution of humor and entertainment for the day. Trying to make a little bit light of the situation. The private sector companies bring agility, innovation, expertise that government agencies may lack. And now clearly we know on the record they have an opportunity to contribute to, we'll call it modernized strategies that the federal government clearly is going to benefit from. Companies like Trend Micro and Riscana offer threat intelligence, automation, scalable tools that augment internal teams, not replace them. And I think that the key here that is more important than any time before is the responsibilities that state, local governments are beginning to take on, that are shifting from the federal government, is something that the private sector now has an opportunity to really contribute to and participate in. Threat intelligence, training, services to provide, and some other elements of cybersecurity in general. I think that the key to remember also is that there is no one size fits all. This is an opportunity also within the private sector to partner up and understand how we all can play nicely together, how we can augment one another, because each of us bring a certain level of discipline and expertise to the table. And rather than compete in traditional ways, we can find ways to support the critical infrastructure, our customers, and look at it as an opportunity to demonstrate a more united front and shape that approach accordingly.
I think that's a fair point, Nir. We've heard this term thrown around within the cybersecurity ecosystem, also this whole of community approach, right? And what does that mean? So, you can easily distill this down to the public and private sectors both each have different capabilities and then also different authorities for what they can bring to bear and what they're actually permitted to do. So it requires a very thoughtful and collaborative conversation about where are there capability gaps in either sector and how might you bring them together to be complementary to each other. And then really thinking carefully about a larger U.S. national cybersecurity strategy, let alone just one for the maritime industry, what does that look like? And we kind of heard at the top of the discussion that a lot of times we see attackers coming in with, through very basic means, right? So kind of getting back to the basics on looking at those security controls back in the NIST cybersecurity framework. What are we doing to maintain basic levels of cyber hygiene? And, we've been surmising here internally with this group, thinking about this late push for offensive cyber operations, and does the United States need that as an additional tool in its toolbox for a larger deterrent strategy? And what we've found is so far that there are a lot of things that we can be doing on the defensive side, both within the public and private sector, to deter actors, but then more broadly to think about other policy levers. So I'm going to conclude us here. I want to talk a little bit, and again, the human factors, relationships, collaboration. What does this mean to engage Seaport leadership and executives across government entities and cybersecurity and IT services organizations? Tell me, Holden, what is the importance of collaborating? And then Milton, I want to throw this to you as well. What is the importance of collaborating directly with CISOs and maritime security leaders, whether it's through those formal channels or more indirectly, just picking up the phone? And if you can share an anecdote, that would be super helpful.
Phil, would you like to go first?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So again, that's a great question. So I find that the benefits of communicating directly with CISOs, especially CISOs that may have been in the industry for years, in the maritime industry or different industries, is they bring a special viewpoint to cybersecurity as it relates to communicating with the C-suite, the executives, right? Because that's where you're going to get most of your I guess you can say most of your backing from, right? If the C-suite can back cybersecurity and IT operations, then that leads to a more mature cybersecurity program at the organization. I find information sharing is helpful when speaking directly to CISOs in the maritime industry. Also, policy collaboration, and also alignment between the different different maritime port authorities, and also the companies that are also in the maritime industry as well.
Well, then anything to add there?
Just that stakeholders are going to have to get used to it, because the cybersecurity and the MTS rule does mandate that one person at your port has to be a designated certifiable CISO. And so again, a lot of the ports already have one, or they have vendors that meet the qualifications. But yeah, that's the new standard, is to have at least one CISO in your org.
Okay, we've got just a couple of minutes left here. I'm going to ask a final question and would love for each of you to respond to close us out. This ties back to one of the recommendations that came out of the GAO, again, thinking about setting strategies and cybersecurity plans. But, Nir, I'll start with you. How can seaports assess their current cyber posture and identify capability gaps?
Thank you for that question. That's a closing question. Sorry, it's just a flood of different tools, techniques, approaches, ideas that come to my mind alone of how to go about doing all of that is just overwhelming. So instead, I'll say, go back to the basics. Simply do the basics. We call it cyber hygiene. Great. Patch the systems, review them, test it, validate, prove that it actually worked, and then do it continuously. We take care of our own health, take care of the health of the systems. That's the very, very basic way of conveying that message. I would say the formal or more official way to respond to it is to always start with a risk assessment. You map your internet-facing assets, you review your endpoints, your network threats, you test for vulnerabilities, you validate against regulatory checklists, and this just continues on, and you have to keep monitoring it. And I think that's what it all comes down to is always keeping an eye out on whether the system is operating properly. And as long as you know that you're doing the basics, beyond and above that is a matter of being able to trust its operation over the long term. And as long as you can trust it, you can convey that trust upstream. And I think it gives you an opportunity to have discussions that otherwise we simply can't have about innovation, progress, next phases, etc. Thank you.
Milton, Holden, anything to add in our last 60 seconds here?
No, I think that was
Yeah.
a good.
Oh, sorry.
Nope.
Well,
I'm done.
Just piggybacking off of what Nira said. Yeah, starting off with the basics, vulnerability assessments, pen tests, also meeting with executive staff, doing tabletop exercises, because everything starts from the top up, right? Once they realize how important cyber and IT operations are, it's a trickle-down effect. Having an incident response plan, having some type of game plan so when something actually happens, they know how to react, and they're not looking for a plan in an emergency.
Got it. Thank you for foot stomping the tabletop and the exercising. Big fan of that over here. Gentlemen, thank you so much for this robust discussion. Ross, leave it to you to close us out officially.
All right. Thank you all very much for joining us today. We appreciate you sticking with us through the 90-minute webinar. It's a lot of information, and if you have any questions, please feel free to follow up. I saw some in the queue. We've captured all of them. We look forward to engaging with you guys further. And again, thank you to all the participants, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a good one.